3 months into what was originally billed as a 4-week war, is an end really in sight? Donald Trump's messaging on bargaining with Iran enough to push Brent crude oil below $100 a barrel for the first time in 2 weeks. Both Washington and Tehran managing expectations of a final deal, a memorandum of understanding, as it's being called right now. Time's not on Trump's side, but with a World Cup to host in less than 3 weeks and inflation that's fast erasing the sweetener of tax breaks for voters ahead of November midterm elections in the U.S. But if inflation's bad there, Iran's has economic ruin to contend with. So again, it's a question of who blinks first and how do regional players align. Gulf states divided between hawks, led by the United Arab Emirates, who've drawn closer to Israel in this conflict, it seems, and doves, led by the Strait of Hormuz's other frontline state, Oman. Which is it? A deal, a return to war, or a permanent state of limbo over the world's biggest choke point for oil and gas? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if the end is in sight. Joining us from Istanbul, journalist Borzu Daragahi, who pens the Badlands newsletter on Substack. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
From London, Nomi Bar-Yaakov, fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Peyman Azmoudeh, senior consultant at risk and political strategy consultants Forward Global. How are you?
Doing all right, thank you.
And former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Bertrand Besancenot. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
The France 24 debate, where you can always listen. That's right, listen wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, don't bet the ranch on a possible deal by the end of the day, as first suggested by the U.S. Secretary of State. But there is movement, what with that Iranian delegation in Doha, negotiations that are also been taking place in China. There was, after the weekend visit of Pakistan's powerful army chief to Tehran, a high-powered delegation that landed in Doha earlier in the day. Again, hardliners here, heavy hitters, I would say. The Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, and they also brought in tow the central bank governor, Abdel Nasser Hemati. Iran still seeking $6 billion in funds from South Korea that were funded back in 2023. Peyman Azmoudeh, do you get the feeling that this time there's movement?
There's definitely movement. When you look at all the visits happening, when you look at what the Pakistanis have been doing, so I mentioned just before, you have Asim Munir especially, so this is the strongman of Pakistan, the field marshal who's basically running the country. He was just in Tehran, now he's in China. The word coming out of the White House, basically what Donald Trump is saying, that shows us that we're very close. I think we're closer than we've been basically since the ceasefire took effect in April. Whether they get over the finish line, I think it depends on who defines what the finish line actually looks like. I think what's most likely, and what seems like it's shaping up, is you're going to have some kind of very broad, short, unconclusive kind of framework agreement that just says the Iranians will lift their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. will lift its blockade of the Iranian blockade, they'll let shipping get back to normal, and it looks like shipping is already getting back to some state of normalcy. You've had some 30 ships basically getting through the Strait every day. But what is pretty clear is that they're going to kick all of the thorny issues down the road. So the nuclear issue, the missile issue, basically everything having to do with the reasons why this conflict started in the first place, all of that is going to get pushed down the road, and basically all the U.S. is trying to accomplish at this point is getting the Strait back open.
Pushing the difficult issues down the road, Nomi Bar-Yaakov, it's kind of what the Trump administration did with Gaza. Can you explain to us what's the role here of the Pakistanis and why this high-powered delegation in Doha? How do the Qataris and the Pakistanis, is their role the same? Is it different? What's the difference?
Well, they complement one another, Francois. I mean, the negotiations are extremely complex, and I beg to differ with Paymon. I think that initially the idea was exactly what he said, to sort of push the bucket with the nuclear issue to the second phase. But Trump has, I think, changed his mind. And as you know, he does pivot, and now he would like to discuss them contemporaneously. And that's what's being discussed in Doha. And that's why you've named the three very senior members of the delegation in Doha at present, and that's precisely what they're discussing. I mean, they're discussing three contemporary issues, three thorny issues contemporaneously. First of all, there is no agreement on the management of the Straits of Hormuz. So the question is, how will the Straits be managed, given that Iran would like to keep the role of lead manager, and that's tricky. Then that's to say the least. Then there's the issue of the end of wars, which of course entails Lebanon. And at the moment, as we are speaking, Israel has issued more evacuation orders around the Tyre region, mainly north of Tyre, where there are dozens of thousands of Lebanese inhabitants still inhabiting their homes there. And then there's the nuclear issues. There is the question of the fate of the 440 kilograms of the 60% enriched uranium, and that is really not going to necessarily be, well, maybe the details will obviously be pushed down the line, but they would like the memorandum of understanding, as I understand it, is also meant to cover that. So at the moment, the White House, or what's coming out of the White House is actually a step back, not a step forward, is that we're not so close to an agreement. And the US president has just written on Truth Social that he is requiring, and I'm quoting him, a mandatory requirement of a number of countries, including Jordan and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, to sign on the Abraham Accords. So, I mean, they're clearly not going to do that. And I don't think that we're literally on the brink of a memorandum of understanding. I think the memorandum of understanding has hit some serious sticky points. And to go back to your original question, Pakistan led the negotiations and managed to reach some understandings, and Iran is doing the fine tuning, and the fine tuning is always more difficult than the general framework.
Right, and again, as you say, the nuclear issue, the release of frozen Iranian funds on the table, and of course the Strait of Hormuz, where in the past week, Tehran has added fiber optic cables to its demands of tolls on ships. The issue, far from settled, it seems, as we heard earlier from one military spokesperson.
Security is important to us. Managing the Strait of Hormuz is our legal right.
Managing the Strait of Hormuz is our legal right. Borsu Daragahi, we heard the German Chancellor quip that the Iranians were very good at not negotiating. Is that what this is? Because we're hearing mixed messages from both sides.
Well, I think that the Iranians are good at driving a hard bargain. One of the things that they are going to demand is either some kind of financial compensation via imposing a toll, or perhaps more legally sound, an environmental tax on ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. And one of the reasons why Iran's central bank governor might be in Doha right now, along with Araghchi and the Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf, is to discuss the frozen funds. There's not going to be any movement on any memorandum of understanding opening up of the Strait without some kind of understanding, some kind of solid gesture of goodwill on the part of the Americans with regard to cold, hard cash. Now, as for negotiating styles, wow. If you just look at the timeline of what happened, Trump, for the first time on Friday, issued this very serious, very sober-minded Truth Social post talking about the Pakistanis and the Qataris and the Saudis and the Turks negotiating this potential framework for a deal. It was unlike anything he had written in recent weeks. And then as soon as he put this out, just the neoconservatives and the warmongers and warhawks in Washington just went crazy on him. And you can see the lobbying effort going on. And then they imposed this, oh, but in order for this deal to come to fruition, you're going to have to sign on to the Abraham Accords. That's absurd. That's a non-starter, especially for Pakistan, which has zero relations with Israel and is probably more pro-Palestinian than Palestinians. So anyway, it looks like there was an effort. There is some serious diplomacy going on, but there's a lot of forces and factors gumming up the works, so to speak, and trying to prevent this deal to come to fruition for whatever purposes.
Yeah, there you see some of what was put out in that post on Truth Social by the U.S. president, saying that it should be mandatory that all these countries, at a minimum, simultaneously sign on to the Abraham Accords. Those countries discussed are Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, already a member, exclamation point. Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and Bahrain, already a member, exclamation points. And just to pick up on that timeline that you mentioned, Borzu, we saw, for instance, the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, over the weekend state this warning, it sounded like, to Saudi Arabia and others. If you refuse to go down this path of signing on the Abraham Accords as suggested by President Trump, it will have severe repercussions. Bertrand Besancenot, why is Senator Graham saying that, and why suddenly are we back to talking about the Abraham Accords?
No, but it is Senator Graham, so this is nothing new. But I can understand that hearing what he heard, that President Trump is trying to say that he will push for that solution. But I'm sure that he knows, because he has a direct discussion with Prince Mohammed bin Salman in particular about this issue. And clearly the message from the Saudi side has never changed, saying yes, since the Arab Initiative, we are ready to recognize Israel. But of course, it means at the same time to have a very strong commitment leading to the creation of a Palestinian state. And of course, in what we hear, nothing is said about the Palestinians. So for that only reason, I don't see any possibility of having this being implemented at this stage. Now, it depends if there is another initiative concerning the Palestinian coming on. But for the time being, we can see that the phase 2 of the so-called Trump plan is completely in a deadlock. So I don't see where we could have this possibility coming soon.
So what you're saying is that these talks are dead on arrival?
No, I think that, we are in there is a real momentum this time for trying to find an agreement. But I think that Mr. Rubio is right to be cautiously optimistic. And we can see there is a lot of diplomatic activity right now. And what is important, that the Gulf states are involved, that China is involved, and of course Pakistan. It means that there is a strong pressure on President Trump to try to find some proper solution. But what we understand is first that it is just a kind of framework agreement, but there is an agreement in principle to open the Strait of Hormuz, to stop the war, and to discuss all the elements in a future negotiation. Bon, this is right. But I'm not sure that at this stage there is already a kind of understanding about where we can go. We have some ideas, of course, for the nuclear part. We know that during the Omani initiative, mediation, there was already some elements that were put on the table and they were supposed to be agreed. So we know that the elements are on the table, but at this stage, it will be a long negotiation. The Iranian negotiators are excellent negotiators, and I'm sure that they will do their utmost in order to have less compromise as possible, and they are much more shrewd than the American side on that.
But you talked about pressure on the U.S. here.
Yeah. No, but there is a pressure.
What? Pressure from what? From Pakistan, from China,
Yeah.
from...
No, from Pakistan, from the Gulf state in particular, because they know what they would have to lose if there is a real war starting again. So they have been very clear that, of course, they don't want to have it. And we understand that President Trump has tried to put in exchange the recognition, but of course, it is a non-starter at this stage.
Again, I asked that question. I'll put it to you, Payman, about what's the role here of the Pakistanis. On the one hand, you have Trump talking about the Abraham Accords, but this is, public messaging.
Right.
What's the role of the Pakistanis when they send their prime minister, as they've done this Monday, to Beijing?
Something that we already knew before the start of the war, and we saw this in February, is that the U.S. government, the way it's currently constituted, is not capable, is not actually equipped to negotiate any kind of serious diplomatic agreement. I mean, we heard from basically every other party involved in those talks in Oman with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff that these two didn't even understand the technical terms of the, purported deal that was being put to them by the Iranians. So when the U.S. reached out, and it's pretty clear at this point that the White House basically asked Pakistan to take on this role, and they've objectively done a pretty good job of it. They are there to get Donald Trump out of the mess that he created for himself at Benjamin Netanyahu's invitation. And the reason why I was saying earlier that we're probably going to end up with some kind of very vague agreement just to get the strait back open, and they're going to kick the can down the road. What's probably going to happen is that they're going to kick the can down the road on everything else, is that the Trump administration isn't actually set up, isn't equipped to make any kind of real deal with the Iranians. So frankly, probably the best that they can get out of this is to get the strait back open, and then basically to rely on the regional allies, so to rely on Pakistan, to rely on the Saudis, to rely on the Qataris and the Omanis, who are actually better equipped than they are, ironically, at this point, probably to...
The Iranians who shot at the gas field belonging to the Qataris, and they're now relying on the Qataris?
That is the situation that Qatar has always found itself in. It's really this catch-22 of, at the same time, you have this country just across the Persian Gulf that constitutes this threat basically to the region as a whole, but also the Qataris share their main gas field, South Pars, North Field, with Iran. They have to work with Iran. So all of these regional countries at this point, they're trying to push the U.S. over the finish line just because even if the war has effectively ended today, I don't think we're going to go back to fighting. But as long as you're stuck in this kind of interminable ceasefire, no one can start rebuilding. No one can move on to a new normal.
And over the weekend, Nomi Bar Yaakov, Tehran dispatching its deputy foreign minister to Oman. You heard Ambassador Besancenot mention Oman. Oman, of course, which borders that Strait of Hormuz. What's the role of Oman in all of this today, since obviously the Omani mediation collapsed on February the 28th?
Well, the Omani mediation collapsed because the US president and the Israeli prime minister decided to attack. I actually think that the US decided to attack Iran long before the Omani mediators made great strides. They were basically on the brink of reaching an agreement on the 26th of February of this year. But I think this time they weren't necessarily discussing the nuclear file, of course, but the nuclear file is currently being picked up at the exact point at which the Omanis left it on the 26th of February. So we raise our hat, kudos to them for getting that far, because that's where we're at today. That's the basis of what's being discussed. But the reason you saw the Iranian delegation there is because they need to decide how to manage the Strait of Hormuz. The south side of the straits is Omani, the north side is Iranian, and that is what's at stake. And I think, as I said earlier, the key point is to reach an agreement on the Straits of Hormuz. The second point is to deal with the frozen assets, $120 billion of Iranian frozen assets. And then, as I mentioned, they're also discussing currently in Doha the nuclear file. So you've got those three major issues. There are many other issues. There's many kilograms of 20% enriched in uranium. You know that the Iranians have the know-how of how to enrich fairly fast. So the question is, what is going to be done with that? No one seems to be talking about it, but it's clearly a key issue. Then, of course, the ballistic program not being discussed, and support for the so-called axis of resistance, the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis. So lots of issues that are not on the table at the moment. The Omanis, again, Strait of Hormuz is the obvious issue. Nuclear is the other issue, and Omanis are master mediators. The nice thing about this particular mediation is that you've got a large number of states working together and complementing one another in the mediation. Turkey has been very active. The foreign minister has been extremely active. China is involved, which, as Ambassador Bezosno mentioned, is very important. Pakistan taking the lead at the US request, and all the leading Gulf states, Saudi Arabia key, Qatar key, Oman key. So, everybody's working together for the same goal. Everyone wants stability, and everyone wants this conflict to end peacefully, so that the straits will be open, and so that oil can flow through the straits, and also so that they can get their sort of economies running, because no one knows whether they will be able to do so as long as the threat is there. And the big elephant in the room is Israel, because the question is, how are you going to stop Israel from deciding to strike Iran if in future, if the is a vague framework agreement is reached, or memorandum of understanding, it's the same thing. It's just a very broad framework like the Gaza one.
Yeah, let's talk.
Israel could...
Let's talk about Israel in a moment. I first want to bring up something that you mentioned and push it further. You listed all those countries that are, and so did Ambassador Bezosno, that are gently trying to nudge the United States away from a full-length campaign. Of course, the longer the war is dragged on, some Gulf states calling in favors. We're talking about the United Arab Emirates, demanding the same country that demanded immediate repayment of a loan to peace facilitators Pakistan, also accepting the help of Egyptian Rafale jets, as seen when President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi visited his Emirati counterpart Mohammed bin Zayed earlier this month. According to the Financial Times, Cairo's help seen as a way to diffuse tensions with Abu Dhabi. Borzu Daragahi, your thoughts on this, because the Egyptians who will probably not, public opinion there, won't see in a very good light the fact that you had that visit by the Israeli Prime Minister to the UAE and being told to collaborate with Abu Dhabi, or agreeing to collaborate with Abu Dhabi?
I think that Sisi is just being smart. I don't think he's going to actually commit troops to the protection of Abu Dhabi. This is a kind of signaling exercise meant to appease the UAE leadership. They're extremely isolated right now. They're isolated from the rest of the Gulf. They were basically pounded upon by Iran during the conflict. Iran basically has threatened to wipe the United Arab Emirates away if there is a further escalation of the conflict. That is because of the robust role that the United Arab Emirates played in assisting the U.S. and Israel during the attack. Iran basically sees the UAE as a Israeli outpost in the Gulf. And so it's feeling very vulnerable. On the other hand, it's also having huge problems with Saudi Arabia. It has permanent issues with Qatar that have yet to be fully resolved yet. And this was a little gesture of support for the United Arab Emirates from Egypt, from Sisi, meant to shore up probably reserves in Egypt's central bank. The United Arab Emirates is a big investor in the central bank and a big investor in Egypt in general. They need the cash. United Arab Emirates needs to look not quite so isolated.
All right, so money talks, but Borzu, when you compare, as you say, the UAE being isolated today from the rest of the Gulf region, how does that compare to Qatar a few years ago?
Oh, it's not as bad as that. I mean, Qatar was basically it was being besieged by those Gulf countries, by the United Arab Emirates. But I think that genuinely there was a regret on the part of Saudi Arabia for taking part in that. Genuinely, the UAE was serving as a kind of Iago character to MBS's Othello and seduced him into putting this conflict and this besiegement of Qatar during that time. And this is a different situation now. I think generally now MBS looks very, very, very suspiciously at the United Arab Emirates and keeps a distance.
All right. So, Ambassador Besancenot, in all of this, I don't know how much you scroll, but this morning you would have seen a lot of memes of Barack Obama because, talking about and even, clips of him talking about the Iran nuclear deal that he had compared to, the way Payman puts it, something that's being kicked down the road anyway. Do you see a return to the JCPOA, the 2015 UN brokered nuclear deal?
But it is clear that President Trump will try to present what will be agreed as something which would be better than the JCPOA. But I think for most observers, of course, it's not the case. Clearly, I don't see what they can really obtain better than what has been done in 2015. And if you add to that the fact that now the Iranians have a kind of economic nuclear bomb with their ability to cut the free circulation in the Strait of Hormuz, it means that the outcome will be less good than what was the one in 2015. But we know President Trump said clearly that whatever is the agreement, he will present it as a victory for the USA. And we know how he will do it. He will say, I have... how do we say, cut the head of the regime. The nuclear program is stopped. We have destroyed most of their ballistic capabilities, and I have reopened the Strait of Hormuz. So he will present it that way, but I'm not sure that many people will be convinced by that. Outside the U.S., certainly nobody. In the U.S., I don't have the answer, but maybe others have the answer.
So the Nikkei news agency out of Japan reporting that the U.S. and Iran are discussing a plan to open the Strait of Hormuz 30 days after the two countries reach a deal. Does that sound like a
No, but in the so-called framework, you have 30 days that can be prolonged for a while. But the idea is certainly to have this reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and having defreezing of some Iranian assets. So this is the main deal, if I may say. Now, there is an agreement to discuss the other aspects, and in particular the nuclear issue, but I'm sure that this will take much more time than 30 days. It will be much more. But at least for the world economy, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz will be the most important thing. And
Payman Azmuddin, do you see that happening? And by the way, there's another bit of breaking news coming in right now. Iran's president ordering the reopening of international internet access inside of Iran. Is that a olive branch being given to the international community?
So this comes back to a point that I wanted to bring up, is that we've been talking about these points of discord between the U.S. and Iran. So we've been talking about the ballistic missile program, we've been talking about the nuclear program, we've been talking about the proxies. We have not talked about people inside Iran. And this is something that Donald Trump himself made a big show of pretending to care about in January, while tens of thousands of people were being massacred in the streets of basically major cities all over Iran. He told the Iranian people that he would help them, and he referred to that repeatedly, even in the first days of the war. It's become abundantly clear that neither he nor Benjamin Netanyahu particularly care about kind of what has happened to the Iranian people over the last few months, what is going to happen to them now that this war has happened and basically done further damage to the Iranian economy. So someone like Masoud Pezeshkian coming now and saying, we're going to reopen international internet access after 3 months. It's been 3 months that Iranians have been cut off from the outside world insofar as being able to access Google or Instagram or really anything that's been Instagram, for example, is a pillar of the Iranian economy. There are millions of people in Iran whose livelihoods depended on that platform and who haven't had access. Up until now, every time he's said something like this over the last couple of months, he's been basically shot down by other people in the government, other people who matter more than him in this new Islamic Republic that's taken shape. So I will kind of reserve judgment.
So who gives the order then to reopen the internet? If it's not him, who's done it?
The Islamic Republic would say that it's the supreme leader, would say that it's Mojtaba Khamenei, except Mojtaba has basically been a phantom leader since he took power 3 months ago. No one's seen him, no one's heard from him. Every intelligence report that we've seen come out is saying that he's basically living like Osama bin Laden did, with couriers basically taking physical messages to him. In reality, what's going on is that you have this new brain trust. So people like Ghalibaf,
Speaker of Parliament.
Yes. People like Ahmad Vahidi, who is the new commander of the IRGC. Pezeshkian is allegedly a member of this group, but he is not the most important member of this group. So if they make that decision, and I would honestly be surprised if they actually make that decision, because they've been trying to force the Iranian people towards this national internet that would basically work like the Chinese internet behind this kind of great firewall. But clearly, they have been using this wartime situation. They've been using this threat of kind of renewed conflict to clamp down on any kind of internal dissent. So the internet is one part of it. The executions are another part of it. So they've been putting political prisoners, people accused of espionage, protesters that were picked up in January to death, basically daily. I want to mention just Abbas Faizabadi, who was the latest protester who was killed by the regime just this morning. They clearly see the need to clamp down on the public and to basically make these kinds of empty gestures, I think without any kind of real pressure from the international community, to put this into the negotiations, which no one has done, none of the regional partners have done, even Israel and the US aren't doing anymore. I don't see any kind of real pressure on them to open up.
So let me ask Borzou Dargai about this. The announcement is, reports are citing it's the head of public relations at Iran's communications ministry that's made this announcement of the reopening of the internet. Is it about events taking place across in the negotiations, or is it about domestic issues? Iran has a pain threshold, but that pain threshold it reaches a point, doesn't it? When you look at, for instance, the inflation rate, which is soaring, Borzou.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's more about economy. The internet, as Payman was saying, the internet is a very important tool of commerce in the country. Iran has I had a great interview, if you want to look on my Substack, with a Tehran entrepreneur who has access to Zoom at his office. And we talked about the pressure that people are under because of the lack of internet. And, you know, he was saying he actually managed to write an op-ed in the reformist newspaper Sharq, and it was widely circulated, this article, saying that the regime was shooting itself in the foot for blocking the internet. It was an own goal, he called it. And he said, actually, rather than being arrested or criticized for writing this, he got a lot of good feedback from people. And so I think there has been this discussion, we should reopen the internet. And I think it's more than anything, if they do reopen the internet, which will probably happen and there's been momentum towards that for the last couple of weeks, it's just a show of confidence. It's a show of confidence in the stability of the regime, and probably a little gift to the people for being rather docile in recent weeks and not going out into the streets and protesting and so on. As Payman was saying, there's been an atmosphere of fear as well. Daily protests also out on the streets in favor of the regime, pro-regime people, basically intimidating anyone who comes out to walk around at night, essentially waving the flag in people's faces and so on. And I think that this is a show of stability and confidence by opening up the internet again.
And there's again that issue that Nomi Bar-Yaakov brought up earlier, which is if the U.S. does cut a deal with Iran, Where does it leave Israel? Israel, as Nomi was saying, warning residents of 10 villages this Monday in southern and eastern Lebanon to evacuate it. We saw heavy shelling on Sunday in places like Nabatie, fresh drone strikes in the other direction by Hezbollah on northern Israel. Now, Israel's prime minister, who last week set the wheels in motion for elections before the month of October, tweeting out that he's tight with Donald Trump after a Sunday phone call. They again saying it's the nuclear danger must be eliminated. That means dismantling enrichment sites, removing enriched nuclear material from territory. Now, the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, he claims Netanyahu in the last week has been marginalized.
Moment when there is an unprecedented anti-Israeli wave sweeping through Western society, especially in the United States, from the radical left to the radical right, all claiming that Israel has excessive influence over decision-making in Washington. The Israeli government is actually at an all-time low in its ability to influence decisions in Washington.
So, Nomi, who's right? Is it Benjamin Netanyahu, who says that all this is happening in lockstep between himself and Donald Trump, or that clip you just heard, one of the leaders of the opposition, Yair Lapid?
Well, I think it's very clear that it's not happening in lockstep. It's very, very clear that the US president is throwing Netanyahu under the bus, and the question is what is going to be done about it. And given that they are in full election mode in Israel, the big question will be what rabbit out of the many rabbits Netanyahu has will he take out of the hat just before the elections? And I allude to what I said earlier. There is a very serious risk that he will attack Iran. I mean, the big question in the elections is memory of the 7th of October and the fact that every single official that was in post on the 7th of October has resigned or been fired, other than the prime minister himself. And he will do anything within his power to ensure that there is some sort of distraction from the question of
but can
his responsibility.
Can he really attack Iran without the approval of the United States?
The question, we've seen it before that he has attacked countries like Qatar, and the US has said that they didn't know about it, and it's very clear that they did know about it. So the question really is, the short answer is yes, is the short answer.
You agree with that, Ambassador Besancenot?
Well, I think that the Israeli cannot do a major campaign against Iran without an approval from the US. They are depending so much financially and military from the US. But Netanyahu has accustomed us to manipulate President Trump, and clearly usually he say, I agree with President Trump, who is a great man, blah, blah, blah. But then the next day, he's doing something else. So I suppose that in particular in Lebanon, he has the feeling that he has a kind of free hand there for a while. So I'm not sure that he will attack Iran, but he will try to do the utmost in Lebanon, saying that it is certainly the easiest way to show that he's the big man and he's taking out all the threats on Israel. I'm not sure that he can do it on Iran without a clear approval from Washington.
Some of this, though, is domestic politics, Borzu Daragahi. We saw last week with a contrarian Republican congressman, Thomas Massey, who was beaten in a primary, and there was a lot of money thrown at that race. Donald Trump wanted him out, but so did the pro-Israel lobby, because he'd been a critic of Israel.
Yeah, this is a huge debate in the United States. right now. It is sometimes getting toxic and sometimes veers into ugly anti-Semitism. But the bottom line is that most Americans right now believe that Israel has too much influence in U.S. foreign policy. More Americans than not are sympathetic with the Palestinian cause rather than the Israeli cause for the first time, maybe in U.S. history. And this is a seismic shift that's taking place. Israel is going to have to adjust. American politicians are going to have to adjust because, I mean, that's become like a litmus test for many American voters. Are you a pro-Israel shill or not? And if you are, then I don't care what your other policies are. I'm going to not vote for you. And that is becoming an increasingly dominant trend in the United States. There's also election year politics in Israel. As you pointed out, I think a lot of the criticisms of Netanyahu and the way he does things from his opponents have to be taken with a grain of salt. I don't think that there's that much air between the various prime ministerial frontrunners and Netanyahu in terms of their policies and how they would go about doing things. I think that there is on the issues of national security, Iran, Gaza, West Bank, and Lebanon, a certain consensus in Israel, with one caveat. I think that any other Israeli government would be smart enough not to unleash Ben-Gvir and Smotrich on the West Bank because that is proving to be a public relations disaster for Israel.
Payman Azmudeh, these questions of ideology that loom large, but again, at the end of the day, it's the price at the pump that matters for our viewers around the globe. Will Donald Trump enforce peace in the name of bringing inflation down?
So we've been talking about whether Israel might act as the spoiler in any kind of agreement, in any kind of permanent ceasefire that comes into play. If it does, it would be in Lebanon, as the other guests have mentioned. When it comes to possibly upending Donald Trump's peace agreement by attacking Iran again, I think that would be very unlikely because the price that basically Benjamin Netanyahu has inflicted on Israel in U.S. domestic politics has already been quite severe. I do think that it's important to keep in mind, though, that any kind of agreement between the U.S. and Iran is not going to end the conflict between Israel and Iran. I think what's more likely is that we had a shooting war in June of last year. We had a shooting war between February and April of this year. There's been a Cold War between Israel and Iran going back decades at this point. And even if there's some kind of agreement between the U.S. and Iran, the Israel-Iran Cold War is going to keep going. Now with the UAE, I think, as more of an important player. So we might see, for example, more assassinations. We might see more examples of subterfuge on Iranian territory. But yes, I think if Netanyahu was to basically shoot Trump in the foot when it comes to his midterm chances by starting a conflict again, where Iran would obviously turn back to the Strait as its main point of leverage, I think it would be catastrophic for the U.S.-Israel relationship.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. Payman Azmudeh, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Bertrand Besancenot, Nomi Bar Yaakov for being with us from London, Borzo Daragahi in Istanbul. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.